We now move to the last session by Shri Abhik Ganguly, another young scholar. It's my pleasure and honor to invite Shri Abhik Ganguly, who is a junior research fellow in the Department of English in the University of Delhi. Abhik is a multifaceted personality. He is a poet, he is a writer, he is a scholar practitioner, much in the great tradition of Bharatiya Parampara. Currently, he is a junior research fellow pursuing his PhD in the Śākta Tantrism at the Department of English in the University of Delhi. He has won prestigious events like the Poetry on Spring contest organized by House of Harmony 2023, besides winning the Amity International Literature Festival's comic trivia, which included a short story writing and literature. His academic essays and poems have been published in various outlets like the Poetry of India, Monograph, Indian Review, Hooghly Review, Setu Magazine, and others. Over to you, Shri Abhik Ganguly.
Hello, good evening everyone. Good evening to those who are leaving right now. So yes, as you've seen already, my topic is dialectical development of Tantric traditions in context of colonial encounters. The focal point of the Tantric tradition of Hinduism's cultural and ritual framework is the two-syllable goddess Kali. She signifies death, genesis, time and flux in Shaktism, in addition to being the feminine manifestation, Shakti, of Kal or Shiv. She is also revered by the Hindu Śākta denomination as Parabrahman, or the ultimate reality. Shiva, the Lord of all, with his divine power, Shakti, is non-different from Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, the creator, the preserver and the destroyer, explains Padartha Darsha, a commentary on Lakshman Deshikendra's Sharada Tilaka. Without Shakti, Shiva is unable to create, sustain, or destroy the universe. Shakti herself contained the seed of all created beings. By virtue of being imbued with divine force, Shakti, Shiva is transcendent of the gunas and immanent in them, according to the Śākta Tantric teachings. She uses avidya, ignorance, to conceal the spiritual nature of specific souls, imprisoning them in the corporeal realm, and Maya to project a world of amazing appearances. While the Vama Kali, or ferocious version of Kali, remained in the worship system of non-householders, the Dakshina Kali, a benign form of Kali, became more prevalent in Bengal. Shama Shungit devotional songs were made popular by Kali's bhakti singers such as Mohindranath Bhattacharya, Kamalakanto Bhattacharya, and Ramprasad Sen. The Tantric teacher Krishnananda Agam Vagish, who was Ramprasad Sen's guru, developed the Kali worship imagery for the general population. Shama Sangeet was created by fusing the Bengali folk culture known as Baul with Kirtan and classical rag. In order to overcome the limitations that prevented our beings from tasting the infinitude of the supreme consciousness that is Kali herself, the aforementioned poets combined folk and raga-centric melodies with other popular musical genres such as folk, semi-classical and classical. Bengali culture adopted this new approach. On the other hand, Kali, or the Divine Mother, also developed as a symbol of Indian nationalist movement that opposed the British colonial control. The most famous depiction of the Divine Mother as the symbol of motherland appears in Bankim Chandra's fictional account of the Sannyasi rebellion, that is Anandamot. Consequently, the Tantric style of devotion was popularized in a way that shaped the Bengalis' social consciousness. The concept of nationhood, as in this case the desire for an independent India, was etched with the idea of the Divine Mother. As more and more revolutionaries turned to this Tantric worship, they frequently invoked Kali before using tactics to overthrow the British Raj. The Anushilan Samiti, which Sri Aurobindo led, was one such group. Kumari Jayavardhana claims that Sri Aurobindo's analogy between Mother Goddess and Mother Country was a potent psychological and sociological illustration that paralleled both the mother's traditional function in the Indian religion and the tragic death of his own mother. However, it's crucial to note how colonizers perceived Tantra in its rawest form as a debauched form of primitive savagery. The worship of Kali has often been scrutinized for its political instrumentalization, particularly in colonial discourses. One colonial intellectual scholar, Valentine Cairol, says, the constant invocation of the terrible goddess against the alien oppressors shows that Brahmanism is ready to appeal to the grossest and most cruel superstitions of the masses. This viewpoint neglects the goddess's nuanced theological and devotional significance within Hindu traditions and instead presents an indigenous religiosity as regressive and politically expedient. The subversive acts of revolutionary political groups for the British colonial intelligentsia were closely linked to the sexual license of the so-called Tantric secret societies. Cairol also said, the Shakti cults, with its obscene and horrible rites, represents a form of erotomania, which is certainly much more common among Hindu political fanatics. The dialectical inversion of the imperial imagination was the defining concept of nation as mother. Bengali men were often portrayed by the British Raj as weak, effeminate, and sexually perverse. Such ludicrous assertions were supported by pseudoscientific research conducted by deeply prejudiced colonial administrators, such as Herbert Risley, who claimed that Bengali males could be recognized at a glance. Bengali nationalists responded in a reactionary manner, portraying their men in media as hypermasculine instead. The propagation of misinformation about Kali was also greatly aided by the British colonial intellectuals. According to purported academics and theologians such as Reverend E. Osborne Martin, who said that Kali is wholly given over to cruelty and blood. She lives in an orgy of horrors. Another Christian missionary from Scotland called Alexander Duff had this to say about goddess Kali. Of all Hindu divinities, this goddess is the most cruel and vengeful, almost constituting Satan worship. In British colonial writers' accounts, the image of Kali is presented as an example of incomprehensible mystery, a reservoir of hate and obsession that the colonizer's mind can't understand, but is forced to explain in a way that borders on paranoia. She is imagined as a hideous black woman with a huge blood-red tongue hanging out of her mouth. According to William Ward, Kali exemplified the puerile, impure, and bloody system of idolatry. This dread nourished the wild fantasies of colonists. They conflated the devotion of Kali among the thugs with broader population of eastern India. Thuggy crimes are those done by thugs who were traditionally organized criminal organizations in India that acted as professional thieves and assassins. A few of these tribes trace their origin to 7 Mohammedan tribes. Hindus appear to have been associated with them at an early period. At any rate, their religious creed and practices as staunch worshippers of Kali also came into being and certainly had no flavor of Islam in them. Nevertheless, in the early part of the 19th century, British authorities saw the Thuggy as an unequivocal evidence of violent criminal syndicates in South Asia, justifying the need for stronger colonial regulations and pervasive British control. As per the colonial imagination during the 1857 mutiny, the Thuggy became a national organization of Kali worshippers who aimed to destroy British colonial power. In the 1830s, India's Governor-General, Lord William Bentinck, and his commanding captain, William Henry Sleeman, embarked on a campaign to eliminate the thugs. Sleeman was significantly responsible for presenting the Thuggy with an exoticized vision of the other in need of civilization. The British viewed Thuggy as ceremonial execution by devotees of the goddess Kali, based on the prevailing conviction in modern Britain that Hinduism is nothing but a wicked religion centered on idolatry. Sleeman regarded it as an unnatural faith. This was also the first time the concept of a nation state in the Eurocentric sense was being applied to the Indian subcontinent, and the British Raj eventually saw itself as a colonial law and order state. that saw its primary activity as that of restraining a criminal and violent population. Sleeman's writings on the Thuggy, in which he repeatedly suggested that Thuggy demonstrated the fundamental depravity as well as incompetence of Indians, helped perpetuate a view of India that made such a state possible. The colonizers lived in a fearful atmosphere as the subversive power of Tantra would reach its height of intensity in the early 20th century with the rise of overt political resistance, particularly in hotbed regions like Bengal. Within the framework of post-colonial studies, biopolitics might be regarded as a version of the French philosopher Michel Foucault's biopower. Foucault's expression indicates the moment at which an individual's bodily autonomy intersects with institutions of powers such as politics, the economies, or the judicial system. According to Foucault, when in a normalizing society you have a power, which is a biopower, and racism is the indispensable precondition that allows someone to be killed, that allows others to be killed. Yet, it is indirect murder in all its forms, such as placing someone in danger of dying, increasing that risk for others, or maybe even inflicting political death. Thus, biopolitics is the ability to keep someone alive while also allowing them to die. It is more than a disciplinary weapon. It is a control instrument employed over a whole population. It was utilized during British colonialism in India to control and subjugate not just the economic and political components of Indian society, but also its religious and cultural norms. Colonial governmentality changed India's public sphere. The government's language, as well as the new political rationalities that comprise contemporary governmental authority, impacted a new perspective of economics and society. Governmentality's improved management of colonial behavior prompted native public opinion to question the integrity of the colonial covenant, resulting in the formation of revolutionary organizations. However, sadly, the general Indian population was fed superstitions based on black magic, which in turn corrupted the Tantric episteme. So much so that today, the first thing that comes to mind for the typical Indian, or let's say someone who's unaware, when they hear the word Tantra, is Kala Jadoo. The word Tantra in some vernacular languages is frequently used to conjure notions of black magic, illicit sexuality, and immoral behavior, thanks to the colonizers. The specter of colonial scholarship still looms large over the scholars of global north, who want to speak up on behalf of the subaltern and educate them about their own traditions. Yet when the subaltern seeks to reassert its agency and autonomy, it is silenced into oblivion. This engagement often follows a paternalistic pattern, where Western scholars assert their authority over these traditions rather than allowing the subaltern to reclaim their own narratives. This dynamic becomes particularly problematic when dealing with complex spiritual traditions such as that of Tantra and the lives of revered Hindu saints like Shri Ramakrishna Paramhans. The misinterpretation of these subjects by Western academics, often grounded in reductive psychoanalytic or sensationalized readings, exemplifies the ongoing epistemic violence that silences indigenous perspectives and reconfigures non-Western traditions to fit predetermined ideological frameworks. One of the most glaring instances of such scholarly misrepresentation is found in Geoffrey Kripal's Kali's Child, a book that presents a deeply problematic psychosexual analysis of Sri Ramakrishna. Kripal claims that Ramakrishna's religious experience were fundamentally shaped by childhood sexual trauma, asserting with unwarranted confidence that this list reads like a summary of his religious life. However, as Swami Tyagananda has pointed out, none of the symptoms that Kripal enumerates, such as hyperarousal, hypersexual behavior, or a fear of adult sexuality, are evident in Ramakrishna's life. Instead, Kripal appears to have approached his subject with a predetermined verdict and engaged in what Tyagananda describes as specious reasoning to manufacture evidence that aligns with his claims. This is a textbook example of the kind of pseudo-scholarship that characterizes much of the colonialist and the neo-colonialist academic discourse, constructing an argument first and then selectively producing evidence in order to support their arguments. Further compounding the issue is Kripal's mistranslation of key Bengali terms to suit his thesis. In the first edition of Kali's Child, he translates the Bengali word kol, which means lap, as on the genitals. And in the second edition, he modifies this to argue that Ramakrishna perhaps saw the lap as a normally defiled sexual space. This is a blatant distortion of the word's actual meaning in Bengali culture, where the lap is associated with maternal affection and comfort. The deliberate misinterpretation of such a fundamental cultural signifier speaks to the larger issue of how Western academics often impose Freudian or sexualized readings onto non-Western spiritual traditions, regardless of their actual context. The phenomena is not unique to Kripal. Other Western scholars also exist, such as Wendy Doniger and David Gordon White, who also have been accused of similar misinterpretations. Doniger, for instance, defines linga exclusively as the phallus, particularly of Shiva, ignoring the nuanced and multi-layered meanings the term holds within the Hindu traditions. Diana Eck, a scholar of Hinduism, has critiqued this tendency of Eurocentrism, when she remarks that Christians look at the Hindu worship of the linga and see it merely as a phallic worship. The selective framing of Hindu symbols is eroticized in crude terms, as it serves to exoticize and diminish the spiritual dimensions of these traditions, reinforcing a colonial gaze that prioritizes titillation over genuine understanding. Similarly, David Gordon White's Kiss of the Yogini has drawn criticism for its crude and sensationalist portrayal of Tantra. A longtime scholar of Kashmir Shaivism and a Tantra practitioner confided in one of the people that had researched a particular project that they found the book disgusting in methodology, conclusion, and its demeaning tone. He was particularly disturbed by how White, after years of research in India, under the guidance of Pandits, had distorted their teachings to fit his own narrative. This speaks to a broader pattern of Western scholars engaging with traditional knowledge systems in a transactional manner, receiving guidance from indigenous sources only to later repurpose that knowledge in ways that betrays its original intent. Ziauddin Sardar has critiqued such academic tendencies, illustrating how non-Western cultures are frequently for sale in the supermarket of postmodern nihilism. Rajiv Malhotra extends this argument in his critique of White, arguing that he introduces a new product in the postmodern bazaar of realities, repackaging Tantra for Western consumption while severing it from cultural and spiritual roots. Wendy Doniger, in a follow-up to White's work, further manipulates the discourse by framing indigenous scholars as being politically aligned with right-wing Hindu nationalism. This kind of intellectual maneuvering effectively erases the long-standing apolitical and deeply spiritual dimensions of Tantra, forcing practitioners into an artificial dichotomy: either abandon Tantra altogether or risk being labeled a fascist. Such framing not only distorts the tradition but also denies contemporary Hindu practitioners the ability to define and engage with their own heritage on their own terms. The reception of Kali's Child and similar works within Western academia also serves troubling questions about scholarly gatekeeping. Huston Smith, one of the most widely respected scholars of religion, severely criticized Kali's Child, calling Kripal's work colonialism updated. Tyagananda further challenged the book's legitimacy by questioning whether any of the Western scholars who had praised it whether they actually read the Bengali sources that it cites. This rhetorical question highlights the fundamental asymmetry in knowledge production. Works that misinterpret non-Western traditions are often uncritically celebrated in Western academic circles, while voices from within those traditions struggle to gain recognition. The broader implications of such academic misrepresentation are significant. When Western scholars, often lacking linguistic and cultural competence, impose their interpretations on non-Western traditions, they not only distort the traditions themselves but also perpetuate colonial power dynamics. These interpretations then become authoritative in global academic discourse, silencing indigenous voices and relegating them to the periphery. The issue is not merely one of scholarly disagreement, but one of epistemic injustice, where the very framework of knowledge production privileges Western methodologies and erases indigenous ones. With this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you so much for having me.
Dhanyavad for this beautiful presentation, Abhik ji. Any questions? I understand it's the end of the day.
They used to move throughout Bengal, going to all the villages and organizing village level meetings, where he used to urge all the people to organize puja of Raksha Kali, which is usually organized at the time of disaster, epidemics, natural calamities, etc. So he used to say that now the country is in this political situation, and for protection we have to organize Raksha Kali Puja everywhere. And as we all know, usually the bali of black colored goats are given in Kali Puja. So Aurobindo used to say in all these village level meetings that now the mother wants the sacrifice of white color. So everybody could understand what he meant, but the British police were left scratching their heads over whether they could prosecute him for this thing.
Wonderful. Pranam garu.
So yeah, I mean, definitely what you mentioned is very essential part of the tantric form of worship. But what I'm talking about is the knowledge production. And sadly, the part about Tantra is that in Western traditions, what happens is that Tantra has been hijacked to the core by Western voices. So much so that what you mentioned, that Tantra, Mantra, Yantra, all of these things don't make sense to them. Where only one aspect makes sense to them, where Tantra means sex, essentially. Where you'll find online courses for $100 on how to have tantric sex. So they don't have any idea. They don't have any pandits, they don't have any paramparas. And more often than not, you will also find some white guy who's giving out lectures. Apparently he's enlightened and he just wants to initiate you in his lineage after you give him $500 US. So that's the part we have to fight. And of course, the point you mentioned, those are technical aspects, and I wanted to focus on a more knowledge production which is getting hijacked. So first we need to reclaim that, and then we can perhaps teach about the technical things that are there. Firstly to the Western audience, because they need the education first, and then to our Indian masses as well, because masses are also influenced by the Eurocentric ideas that are there, particularly due to neoliberalism, because their understanding is more influenced by Marvel or DC, Captain America, Batman, Superman. So, of course, what I mean to say is these are cultural signifiers. So we need to go back to our own roots in order to trace them. So yeah, I hope I do make sense. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Abhik. Oh, one more question is there.
Hi Abhik, my name is Dr. Pawan. So, I just wanted to clear one misconception that Tantra was never hijacked by the West, because you have people like Arthur Evelyn, John Woodruff, who was initiated into the Śākta tradition, and then he wrote a series of books. Although most of the writers, they considered his books as primary texts. And then there is one thing that I didn't understand, especially in your title, that what is the significance or what is the meaning of dialectical development? Because as far as my knowledge goes, this contradiction, it's really difficult to resolve this contradiction. So what is this dialectical development?
So yeah, so first thing you asked was about Arthur Avalon, and undoubtedly, I mean Arthur Avalon's contribution to the, if we say overall tantric episteme, with respect to his translations, is immense. Although many scholars disagree with the versions of his translations that have come out, and they believe that they need to go and read the original Sanskrit ones or the original Bangla ones of the Śākta Tantrism that he had translated, starting with Colonial Tantra. So yeah, I mean, I don't mean all the white people. Of course, there are many good white scholars as well. Even right now, for example, Mark Dykowski was there. Dr. Bettina Baumer is there, who has taught me Vigyan Bhairav Tantra. So of course, I can't generalize it for everyone. But the thing is, what I am talking about is the socio-political aspect of knowledge production. So now coming to the second part of your question, which you said that how is it dialectical? So there's three aspects of, or three dimensions to the talk that I have given today. First is sociological, second is political, and third is the spiritual. So what you were saying, dialectical doesn't make sense when it comes to the spiritual development of Tantra. But when we are taking an account of the sociological and the political dimensions, then we have to believe the damage, or we have to take into account the damage that the colonizers had done. Because a larger part of it has gone into oblivion, or perhaps people are clueless about it because of the education policies and the change in them that occurred, starting with Macaulay's Minutes of Education in 1835, which initiated the whole process, and then it sort of cascaded into another thing. And of course, like people are clueless when it comes to their own traditions. And the thing, what I am tracing was the socio-political dimensions of the knowledge production process that was there. So in that process, it becomes automatically dialectical because the colonizers inflicted damage upon the indigenous epistemes that are there. And people from here, of course, they responded. And even right now, as I talked about Kali's child, so people like white men like Jeffrey Kripal are still doing the Christian missionaries' work. They haven't stopped yet. But the thing is, we also haven't stopped responding to them. So yeah, that's my answer. Sorry? Yeah. So yeah, next time I'll title it Dialectical Damage.
And there is also a book by Carl Gustav Jung. He visited India in 1930s, okay. He was invited by the Psychological Society of India, and he stayed in Banaras, then moved to West Bengal. And after that, when he returned, he delivered a series of lectures. And when you read his book, basically it's a collection of his lectures, Kundalini Yoga. So I think Sonu Samdasani edited it. So he said that it's not possible for Western mind to practice Tantra because we are not prepared for it. And he also turned the entire Kundalini chakra. And he said that it's not possible in the sense that we are not prepared for it. So people like Jung, or like well-established psychoanalysts, they accepted it, that it's not possible. So when you say hijacked, so they were just looking for something through which they can popularize their own esoteric traditions. So they used Tantra as an exotic thing to market their own ideas. So that's what I was trying to tell you. And dialectical development damage is not development.
You're taking it in the literal sense because what I meant was in a metaphorical sense. So I think we can't get into the semantics of the language. So yeah, development here doesn't mean development in the neoliberal sense, but yeah, if you look at it, it's irony. So yeah.
Dhanyavad. It was nice to see that end of the day, after the final presentation, we still had 3 questions, and 2 questions and an observation. Thank you so much. I think it was definitely, all of you will agree with me that we had an intense day, a day full of very deep exploration. We truly touched upon the emergence, evolution, and effect of the IK studies, through the colonial encounter. It's very important that this subject is explored upon fully in every single way over years, maybe even decades. The West has continued to explore the World War I and World War II continuously over the last 50-60 years. It's a shock that in spite of all the age of reason and enlightenment and whatnot, finally it all culminated in the two wars, kind of shocked its intellectuals so much that they poured themselves into analyzing every dimension of it over the next 2, 3, 4 decades, and it has not stopped. It has, of course, in the recent stopped because it has gone elsewhere. So you see enormous number of Hollywood movies on the Nazi situation, and all kinds of movies and all kinds of literature exists. However, in India, one must say that in the colonial era, our people explored this much more, and in the post-independence era, unfortunately, it has gotten brushed beneath the carpet deliberately. I think this very same subject that today Dr. Rajshri Srinivasan Vasudevan spoke about has been written, but in a very different way in the by the left liberal establishment. The very same subject has been presented, the very same narrative in its 2-3 subtleties, it can significantly change. Now we are re-narrativizing it from our worldview. So this is extremely important, and this has to happen at a large scale. And like Dr. Nagaraj Paturi Garu said, that a new strand of history is evolving, and I'm sure it will not just be a new strand. It will be many new strands, and the confluence of all of that will be an ocean in itself. With this, taking permission from our Kulapati Garu, we will call today's session as completed. We will start tomorrow